The steam rising from that cup should have been my last breath. Instead, it became the moment I realized just how clever I really was. My name is Sarah Wilkes, and 3 months ago, I discovered my husband was planning to end my life. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant. You get really good at spotting patterns, following paper trails, and most importantly, staying 3 steps ahead of people who think they're smarter than you. Hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get wild. It started on a Tuesday morning in our kitchen in Portland, Oregon. I was running late for work at Morrison & Associates, where I specialized in tracking financial fraud for insurance companies. Ironic, considering what was about to unfold in my own home. "Made you something special, honey," my husband Marcus said, setting down a steaming mug in front of me. His voice had that overly cheerful tone he'd been using lately, the same tone that made my skin crawl because it felt so forced, so rehearsed. The smell hit me immediately. Sweet, almost syrupy, but with an underlying chemical tang that made my nose wrinkle. Nothing like the green tea I drank every morning for the past 5 years of our marriage. How thoughtful, I managed, forcing a smile while my stomach churned with a familiar unease. That feeling had been growing stronger over the past few weeks, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong in my own home. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent my entire career learning to trust my instincts about when numbers don't add up. Well, nothing about my husband's behavior had been adding up lately. Just then, Derek shuffled into the kitchen wearing his usual uniform of gym shorts and a stained t-shirt. At 33, Marcus's younger brother had been crashing in our spare bedroom for 4 months now, ever since his most recent girlfriend, what was her name, Jessica? Jennifer? Had finally gotten tired of supporting his unemployed lifestyle. "Morning, Sarah," Derek drawled, that familiar smirk already in place. "Still drinking that health nut stuff, I see." He reached for a mug from the cabinet, and I watched as Marcus quickly poured him a cup from the same pot he'd used for mine. But something about Marcus's movements caught my attention. The way his hand trembled slightly, how he avoided making eye contact with me. "Actually, this is a special blend," Marcus said, still not looking at me. "Something to help with stress." The way he emphasized that last word made every nerve in my body stand on end. Yes, I'd been stressed lately. Who wouldn't be? With Derek's constant presence turning our home into a frat house, his endless commentary about my uptight personality, and his not-so-subtle suggestions that Marcus deserved better than his ball and chain wife. Derek plopped down next to me at the kitchen island, invading my personal space like he always did. "Stress, huh? Maybe if you learned to relax once in a while, you wouldn't need magic potions." I bit back my response, as I'd trained myself to do over these past months. Every time I complained about Derek's behavior, Marcus would get defensive, accusing me of being unwelcoming to family. Better to stay quiet and avoid another argument about his precious baby brother. But as Marcus turned to put the teapot back on the stove, I made a decision that would change everything. In one smooth motion, I switched our mugs, sliding Derek's toward me and mine toward him. "Oops," I said sweetly. "Looks like we mixed them up." I handed Derek what had originally been my cup, watching his face carefully. He shrugged and took a long gulp, as if it were beer instead of hot tea. "Tastes weird," he muttered, but kept drinking. I lifted Derek's original cup to my lips and took a small sip. Plain black tea. Nothing unusual about it at all. But when Marcus turned back around and saw Derek with my cup, his face went absolutely white. The color drained from his cheeks so fast I thought he might faint right there in our kitchen. "Everything okay, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice light and concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I'm fine," he stammered, but his hands were shaking as he gripped the counter. His eyes kept darting between Derek and me, and I could practically see the panic building behind his glasses. Our marriage hadn't always been this strained. When we met 6 years ago at a professional networking event, Marcus had seemed genuinely impressed by my career. He was working as a project manager at a construction company then, and he'd spent hours asking me about my cases, fascinated by how I could trace money through complex corporate structures. "You have this amazing analytical mind," he used to say. "You see patterns that other people miss." He'd called it amazing then. These days, he called it obsessive. Things started changing about 18 months ago when his company went through layoffs. Marcus was one of the casualties, and losing his job had shattered something fundamental in him. His confidence evaporated, and he'd started drinking more, spending entire days on the couch while I worked longer hours to cover our mortgage. Then Derek showed up 4 months ago, claiming he just needed a few weeks to get back on his feet. Those weeks had stretched into months, and Derek's presence had poisoned the atmosphere in our home. He'd always resented me, probably because I was the first girlfriend or wife in the family who wouldn't put up with his juvenile behavior and constant need for financial support. At family gatherings, he'd make jokes about my stick-up-my-butt and how I was changing his brother. Marcus would laugh along, leaving me to sit there humiliated while his entire family treated me like the uptight outsider who didn't understand their family dynamics. But lately, Derek's comments had taken on a darker edge. He'd started making references to how much better Marcus would be without me, how I was holding him back from his true potential. Last week, I'd overheard him on the phone with someone, talking about how I had decent life insurance and how Marcus deserved to start fresh. That conversation had been the wake-up call I needed. I'd started being more careful around both of them, keeping a small digital recorder in my purse and documenting their more concerning conversations. I'd also reached out to my college friend Lisa, who worked as a paralegal, asking hypothetical questions about suspicious behavior and evidence collection. "You know," Derek said, setting down his mug and wiping his mouth, "this stuff really does taste terrible. You sure you know what you're doing with these tea experiments?" Marcus's face had gone from white to a sickly green color. It's an acquired taste. Maybe you should drink some water." "I'm fine," Derek waved him off. "Takes more than some bitter tea to knock me down." I continued sipping from Derek's original cup while watching the growing panic in my husband's eyes. Whatever had been in that tea he'd prepared specifically for me, it wasn't meant to be a harmless stress reliever. The sweet smell, Marcus's nervous behavior, and his obvious distress at seeing Derek drink from my cup all pointed to something far more sinister than herbal tea. 25 minutes had passed since Derek finished the suspicious tea when he suddenly doubled over. "Oh God," Derek gasped, clutching his stomach as sweat beaded across his forehead. "Something's really wrong." He stumbled from the kitchen island toward the living room couch, his face turning an alarming shade of green. Marcus rushed after him, his panic no longer concealed. "What's happening to him?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. I pulled out my phone, pretending to consider calling for help while actually starting my voice recording app. "I don't know," Marcus stammered, kneeling beside his brother. "Maybe he ate something bad." "Derek, what did you have for dinner last night?" Derek could barely speak through the waves of nausea. "Nothing different." "Marcus, what was in that tea?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Marcus's eyes darted to me, then back to his brother, his mouth opening and closing without words. "Marcus," I said calmly, never breaking eye contact with my husband, "what exactly was in that tea you made for me?" His face went completely white. In that moment, I saw the truth written across his features: guilt, fear, and the dawning realization that his plan had gone horribly wrong. Derek's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His breathing became shallow, and he started shaking uncontrollably. "Call an ambulance," he managed to whisper. I dialed 911, speaking clearly and calmly to the dispatcher while keeping my phone positioned to catch every word. "My brother-in-law is experiencing severe stomach pain and nausea after drinking tea. He's sweating profusely and seems to be having difficulty breathing." While we waited for the paramedics, I carefully moved to the kitchen and used a clean plastic bag to preserve what remained of the teapot and the mug Derek had drunk from. Years of forensic work had taught me the importance of evidence preservation. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "Making sure the doctors have everything they need to help Derek," I replied evenly. "They'll want to know exactly what he consumed." The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by a police car. "Standard procedure for potential poisoning cases," the officer explained. As the paramedics worked on Derek, loading him onto a stretcher, I approached the responding officer. "Officer Rodriguez," I said, reading his name tag. I think you should know that my husband prepared this tea specifically for me, but my brother-in-law drank it by mistake. Marcus's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with horror at my words. Ma'am, we'll need to take statements from both of you, the officer replied, already reaching for his notepad. As they wheeled Derek out to the ambulance, I caught Marcus's arm. The truth has a way of coming out, I said quietly, so only he could hear. You might want to think about that. The look of pure terror in his eyes told me everything I needed to know about what had really been in that tea. At the hospital, I sat in the sterile waiting room while doctors worked to stabilize Derek. Marcus paced nearby, his hands shaking as he repeatedly checked his phone. The police had taken our initial statements, but I knew they'd be back with more questions once they determined what had made Derek so sick. Mrs. Wilkes. A doctor approached us with a grim expression.
I'm Dr. Patterson.
Your brother-in-law is stable for now, but we found concerning levels of ethylene glycol in his blood. Marcus dropped into a chair like his legs had given out. Ethylene glycol. Antifreeze. It was a particularly nasty poison. It initially tasted sweet, which would explain why Derek had been able to drink the entire cup despite complaining about the bitterness. The bitter, chemical smell I detected must have been from something Marcus added to mask the antifreeze taste. Antifreeze? I repeated, feigning shock. How could that be possible? Dr. Patterson's expression was serious. This appears to be intentional poisoning. The police will need to investigate your home and any beverages consumed this morning. Marcus's face had gone beyond pale to a sickly gray color. I reached over and squeezed his hand, playing the concerned wife perfectly. Honey, you look terrible. This must be such a shock. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been documenting suspicious behavior for weeks. Hidden in my home office was a small safe containing printed emails, photographs, and recorded conversations that painted a very different picture of my loving husband. It had started 6 weeks ago when I'd accidentally opened a piece of mail addressed to Marcus, a confirmation for a life insurance policy increase on me. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was just being responsible and planning for the future. But the timing, combined with Derek's increasingly hostile comments about my holding Marcus back, had made me suspicious. I'd begun paying closer attention to their conversations, especially the late-night talks they thought I couldn't hear from upstairs. Using a baby monitor app on my phone, I'd recorded several disturbing exchanges where they discussed how my death would solve Marcus's financial problems and free him from our miserable marriage. The most damning recording was from just 5 days ago, when Derek had joked about how accidents happen all the time, and Marcus had responded that he just needed the right opportunity. They'd laughed about it as if planning my demise was some kind of twisted bonding activity. Mr. and Mrs. Wilkes? Detective Lisa Park approached us, introducing herself as the lead investigator. We'll need to search your home and collect any beverages or containers that might be relevant to this case. Of course, I said immediately. We want to help in any way we can. This is just so frightening, the idea that someone could have poisoned Derek in our own home. Marcus remained silent, staring at the floor. Mr. Wilkes, Detective Park addressed him directly. I understand you prepared the tea that your brother consumed. Yes, but it wasn't meant for him, Marcus stammered. I made it for Sarah, but somehow the cups got mixed up. The detective's eyebrows raised slightly. So, you're saying this poison was intended for your wife? I watched Marcus realize his mistake, how his attempt to deflect suspicion had actually made things worse for him. No, I don't know how the antifreeze got in there. Maybe someone broke into our house, or maybe it was contaminated somehow. His story was falling apart in real time, and we all knew it. The search of our home yielded exactly what I'd expected it would. Detective Park and her team found the antifreeze container in Marcus's workshop, with his fingerprints clearly visible on the cap. They also discovered internet search history on his laptop detailing ethylene glycol poisoning symptoms and detection methods. But what they didn't find was the evidence I'd been carefully collecting for weeks. Mrs. Wilkes, would you mind coming to the station to give a more detailed statement? Detective Park asked as the search concluded. Absolutely. I want to help however I can, I replied, grabbing my purse, the one containing my digital recorder and the key to my office safe. At the police station, I sat across from Detective Park in a small interview room, my hands folded calmly in my lap. "I need to be completely honest with you," I began, my voice trembling just enough to suggest emotional distress. "I've been worried about my safety for weeks now." Detective Park leaned forward, her attention fully focused. "My husband has been acting strangely since he lost his job, and his brother Derek has been living with us, making these awful comments about how I'm ruining Marcus's life. Last week, I overheard them talking about my life insurance policy." I paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. I was scared, so I started recording some of their conversations. I know it sounds paranoid, but after this morning, I think my instincts were right. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from 5 days ago. Derek's voice filled the room. "Accidents happen all the time, you know? People drink the wrong things, slip and fall. All kinds of unfortunate events." Marcus's response was even more damning. "I just need the right opportunity. Something that looks natural." Detective Park's expression grew increasingly serious as she listened to more recordings. In one, Derek suggested that my accident should happen soon because he was tired of living in this depressing house with that uptight witch. In another, Marcus complained about how my controlling nature was preventing him from accessing our joint savings account to pay Derek's debts. "There's more," I said quietly, producing a key from my purse. "I've been keeping copies of emails and documents in a safe at home. I was planning to talk to a lawyer next week, but after what happened to Derek..." The detective's eyes widened as I explained about the life insurance policy increase, the suspicious online purchases on Marcus's credit card, and the pattern of escalating verbal abuse that had made me fear for my safety. "Why didn't you come to us sooner?" she asked. "I wasn't sure anyone would believe me," I admitted. "Derek can be very charming when he wants to be, and Marcus had everyone convinced that I was just being paranoid because of work stress. I thought I needed more evidence before I could prove what they were planning." Detective Park studied me carefully. "Mrs. Wilkes, you realize that if your husband intended to poison you and your brother-in-law drank it instead, that's attempted murder." "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just can't believe the man I married could actually try to end my life. But the evidence speaks for itself." What the detective didn't need to know was how carefully I'd orchestrated this entire scenario. How I'd deliberately mentioned Marcus's specialty routine to Derek the night before, knowing his competitive nature would make him want to try whatever was too good for him. How I'd practiced switching the cups until I could do it seamlessly. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting someone's own evil plans destroy them. The next several hours unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. Detective Park retrieved the evidence from my home safe, including emails between Marcus and Derek discussing getting rid of the problem and researching undetectable poisons. The digital paper trail was extensive and damning. Marcus was arrested that evening at the hospital, where he'd been maintaining his vigil beside Derek's bed. Not out of brotherly love, but out of fear that Derek might wake up and implicate him. "Mrs. Wilkes." Detective Park called me with an update the following morning. "Your brother-in-law regained consciousness overnight. He's corroborating your account of events and has provided additional information about your husband's plans." It seemed that Derek, faced with the reality of nearly dying, had decided to save himself by confessing everything. He admitted to pressuring Marcus to do something about me, claiming that my controlling behavior and financial management were preventing Marcus from lending him money for his mounting debts. According to Derek's statement, they had originally planned to make my death look like an accident. But Marcus had grown impatient when I started questioning the increased life insurance policy. The antifreeze poisoning was meant to appear like I'd accidentally consumed contaminated tea, a tragic mishap that would leave Marcus a grieving widower with a substantial insurance payout. "There's something else," Detective Park continued. "We found additional evidence in your husband's workshop. It appears this wasn't his first attempt to harm you." My blood ran cold, despite knowing I should be safe now. "What do you mean?" "We found evidence that he'd been adding small amounts of prescription sleep medication to your coffee for weeks. Not enough to seriously harm you, but enough to make you appear more forgetful and unstable." He was building a case for you being mentally incompetent. The revelation explained so much. My recent struggles with memory, the fatigue I'd attributed to stress, the way Marcus had started pointing out my mistakes to friends and family. He'd been systematically undermining my credibility while slowly poisoning me. We believe he was planning to escalate gradually until he could claim you'd accidentally overdosed on your own medication, the detective explained. The antifreeze was likely plan B when the slow poisoning wasn't working fast enough. I sat in stunned silence, processing the full scope of Marcus's betrayal. Not only had he planned to end my life, but he'd been mentally and physically abusing me for months in preparation. Mrs. Wilkes, I want you to know that your quick thinking and evidence collection may have saved your life, Detective Park said. Without those recordings and documents, we might not have been able to prove premeditation. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Marcus had tried to poison me less than 24 hours ago, and felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd outsmarted him, protected myself, and ensured that justice would be served. But I'd also lost the man I'd thought I loved, discovered that my marriage had been a lie, and learned that someone I'd trusted implicitly had been slowly destroying me from within. The house felt different now, quieter and somehow cleaner without Marcus and Derek's toxic presence. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely in my own home. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, my paralegal friend. Saw the news. Are you okay?
Do you need anything?
I smiled as I typed back. I'm safe now, and I think I'm going to be just fine. 8 months later, I stood outside the courthouse steps, breathing in the crisp autumn air of Portland. The trial had concluded with Marcus receiving a sentence of 20 years for attempted murder and Derek getting 3 years as an accessory. Justice had been served, but my real victory was just beginning. During the trial, every detail of their plan had been exposed to public scrutiny. The media had dubbed it the Morning Tea murder plot, and the story had spread throughout our community and beyond. Marcus's reputation was permanently destroyed. His family had disowned him, and he'd lost everything: his freedom, his marriage, and any hope of the insurance money he'd tried to kill for. But the most satisfying part wasn't his imprisonment. It was watching him realize, piece by piece, how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered him. The prosecution had presented my evidence methodically: the recordings that proved premeditation, the digital trail showing his research into poisons, and the documentation of his previous attempts to slowly poison me with sleep medication. Marcus's defense attorney had tried to paint me as a manipulative wife who'd driven him to desperation, but the evidence spoke louder than any character assassination. What truly devastated Marcus, though, was learning how long I'd been aware of his plans. During my testimony, I'd calmly explained how I'd suspected something was wrong weeks before the antifreeze incident. I described installing the baby monitor app, setting up the hidden recorder, and carefully documenting his every move. You see, Your Honor, I'd said, looking directly at Marcus across the courtroom, my husband always underestimated my intelligence. He thought I was just an uptight, controlling wife who paid too much attention to details. But those details are what saved my life. The look of absolute defeat in Marcus's eyes when he realized I'd been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time was worth every sleepless night I'd spent gathering evidence. With Marcus behind bars and Derek serving his sentence, I was finally free to reclaim my life. The first thing I did was sell our house. The place held too many dark memories, and I wanted a fresh start. I used the proceeds to buy a small craftsman house in the Pearl District, complete with a garden where I could grow my own herbs for tea. The irony wasn't lost on me. My job at Morrison & Associates had been understanding throughout the ordeal, and my supervisor had even offered me a promotion to senior forensic accountant. My skills in identifying discrepancies and maintaining meticulous records had proven invaluable both professionally and personally. I'd also started volunteering with a local domestic violence organization, helping other women recognize the warning signs of abuse that I'd initially missed. Many of them were surprised to learn that poison was more common in domestic violence cases than people realized, and that emotional manipulation often preceded physical harm. The thing about abusers, I'd tell the women in our support group, is that they always underestimate their victims. They think we're too weak, too trusting, or too scared to fight back. But sometimes the best defense is letting them defeat themselves. My story had become something of a local legend, the forensic accountant who'd applied her professional skills to catch her would-be murderer. Several women had reached out to thank me for showing them that they weren't powerless, that careful planning and documentation could protect them from dangerous partners. The new house felt like a sanctuary after years of walking on eggshells around Marcus and Derek. I could drink my morning tea without fear, work in my garden without looking over my shoulder, and sleep peacefully knowing that the only person who could hurt me now was safely locked away. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, and I had ensured that Marcus would spend decades regretting the day he'd underestimated Sarah Wilkes. As I tend to my herb garden now, brewing my own safe blends each morning, I often reflect on how my methodical nature, the very trait Marcus found so insufferable, became the weapon that destroyed his evil plans and secured my freedom. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's best served in a cup of tea that was never meant for you. If you've got a story about standing up to toxic family members or recognizing the warning signs others missed, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, survival, and the strength we never knew we had.